Hello, Kidlit Pride folks tuning in. This panel is called Queer Identities Across the Globe, Part 1. And I have the great fortune of speaking to authors that are living outside of the United States. And I don't know that I'm typically qualified to do this. My name's Sarah Farizan. I'm an author of queer books. I'm born and raised in the States, but I have a great appreciation for books that are, I feel like sometimes in YA we can center stories that are set and written by people in the States. And for me, I always think that they're teenagers outside of North America, and they are also queer teenagers outside of North America. And that's really important and interesting to read about. My other qualifications is that I'm an admirer of all the other authors who will introduce themselves soon. And also all my ex-girlfriends and all my relationships after we break up, they seem to find career opportunities in foreign countries, which they say is a coincidence. That might be my qualification in speaking to this lovely international set. What I'm going to have the lovely authors do. Oh, also, yeah, I should say that I'm the author of a couple books.
Yes, you are right to do so.
My latest one came out in 2018. And this is a giant cardboard cutout of the main character, Bijan, which I have been talking to in quarantine. And thankfully, he has not begun talking back. So we shall see how that goes during the duration of 2020. We know it's a difficult time for so many people, and there's a lot of reckoning that's happening, and there's a lot of grief, and there's a lot of anger, and also a lot of joy. But today we're gonna bring you the queer craft writing joy, and I'm gonna ask these wonderful authors craft questions. And I hope that you pick up their books. Mine, I can just tell you what happens. It's not, you just follow me on Instagram or something. Okay, so I will have the authors introduce themselves, their preferred pronouns. They're going to pitch their work to you that they would like you to read when you are able, and also where they are calling in from. So we have an order established. Number one.
Hello. Hello, Kidlit Pride. So I'm Simon James Green. My pronouns are he, him. I'm calling from London in the UK, excitingly. So I write YA LGBT contemporary, basically. My first book was Noah Can't Even, the one with the big banana on the front, very subtle. But my new book, which it was meant to come out. It was meant to come out in June, but obviously because of the virus, it is now coming out in August. But it is this. I've only got a poster, not the actual cover. But it's Heartbreak Boys is the new one out in August. Now this is about two gay teenage boys called Jack and Nate, who are basically dumped at prom, and then decide to try and get back at their exes by showing the world, or at least Instagram, that they are having a way better summer than they are. The only trouble is, in reality, they're holed up in this awful camper van with Nate's parents, basically trundling around all the worst bits of the UK, damp campsites, awful towns, horrible motorway motels. So they have to end up faking the whole thing on Instagram, basically, while their exes who have got together are living it up in Ibiza, partying and going to bars and clubs. So it's basically a happy, fun, funny, summery kind of rom-com about these two boys and how they get on, and do they or don't they fall in love in the end? We will have to see, of course, by reading the book and finding out. But that's me, and that's Heartbreak Boys.
Excellent, thank you. Number one.
That sounds so good, Simon.
I also I don't know if I mentioned my pronouns are she, her. Being mindful of that. So number two, where is number two?
Hi.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Kidlit Pride. I'm Marieke Nijkamp. I'm the author of This Is Where It Ends. Recently, the Oracle Code YA graphic novel that came out from DC, with illustrations by Manuel Paisano. So if you've missed Barbara Gordon as Oracle, check it out. I am also the author of the upcoming Even If We Break, which is a book about a group of teens who go to a cabin in the woods, because that's always a good idea, to play the role-playing game. I know, right? To play the role-playing game that brought them together, and the weekend escalates a bit. People end up dying. It's not great. I've basically been pitching it as One of Us is Lying meets Dungeons and Dragons, by way of pretty great cosplay as well. So that's coming out in September. It features a non-binary main character as well as a trans boy main character, and the rest of the crew is pretty queer because why not? I'm calling in from the Netherlands. My pronouns are whatever you want them to be. I'm a non-binary disabled creator, so that's me.
Badass number 2. Number 3, hello, madam. How are you? Number 3. You're number 3.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah. And there was like familiarity where I got all like googly eyed, like, hello, number 3. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Ngan, calling in from Paris, France. And I am the writer of these little babies, Girls of Paper and Fire, and Girls of Storm and Shadow, which is the sequel, and currently trying to write the sequels to those. So it's a trilogy. So I'm writing Girls of Fate and Fury. It was probably a good idea to remember the name of your own book, but you know, it is quarantine and everything is all very weird. And yeah, so I identify as queer, and she, her is good.
Excellent. And number 4, please. Number 4.
Hi, so my name is Adiba Jaigirdar. My pronouns are she, her. I'm calling in from Dublin, Ireland. I'm the author of The Henna Wars, which is a book about a girl called Nishat, who is a Bangladeshi Muslim, and she's a lesbian. She comes out to her parents, and she's dealing with the fallout of that while also navigating a crush on a girl in school who's culturally appropriating from her during a school business competition where they both have rival henna businesses.
Wow.
Excellent. I'm going to read that. I mean, I'm going to read everybody's. And I'm biased, so sorry. Number 5, please. Number 5. Hello.
Hi. I'm Corinne Duyvis. I am calling in from the Netherlands, from a small town that whenever I mention it, even to people who are semi-local, they just look at me and go like, what? Where? Which is very different for me since I grew up in Amsterdam, where I lived for 30 years. My pronouns are she, her. I am bi and disabled. And I wrote the novels Otherbound, which is a queer fantasy novel about a boy who sees through the eyes of a girl from another world every time he closes his eyes. And On the Edge of Gone, which is a near future apocalyptic sci-fi about an autistic girl at the end of the world. This book is set in Amsterdam. I blow it up. It's really fun. Blowing up your own city, that means the book is, you know, apocalyptic, so not sure fun is the right word. I also wrote a Guardians of the Galaxy tie-in novel, which is fun because otherwise you're doing Guardians of the Galaxy very wrong. And my next novel is coming out in September. It is called The Art of Saving the World. And it is about a teenage girl who is also an asexual lesbian. She is supposed to save the world, but the powers that be have no faith that she'll be able to pull it off. So they cheat and pull in versions of her from alternate universes, who are all somewhere on the queer spectrum, by the way. And now they have to work together to save the world. There are also dragons. So that's me and my books, which I wanted to show here, except I forgot. That's it.
Everyone is going to look everybody up because everyone is very charming and smart and fun and ridiculously good looking. and you know, shallow. So. Okay, so can I ask you like craft questions and stuff?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Sure.
Because I hope that a lot of young people are watching this, a lot of teenaged people or about to be teenaged people. I wanted to ask all of you, did you all write creatively, like for fun when you were teenagers? And when do you remember first writing queer characters? Because when I was in high school and I wrote for fun, I would sometimes write these like either fan fiction of a show I won't mention, but I was writing straight people and how I thought they behaved. I don't know if I in that. And they also never really got it on. They were just kind of like, oh, let's go over here.
Fade to black.
Because he went in for a kiss. So, but yeah, like in college, I think I started writing, like university, sorry. I think I started writing queer characters. So I was wondering for all of you, did you write when you were teens, like creatively, fiction or nonfiction? And do you remember when you first were like, I'm going to write queer people? And I think too, this is like generational, like I was closeted in high school and also like I'm 35. So I think it's interesting for like teens now that are really not in that situation, or there are teens that still are, depending, you know, their situation. But I would be interested to hear all of you talk about that.
I definitely wrote as a teen. I was deeply involved with online role-playing games, forum-based.
Okay.
90% of what I wrote was X-Men. And I started writing.
Oh, wait, can I ask a question?
Yes.
About X-Men, because I really enjoy the animated series. That theme song, we're going to play it after this. It slaps. You're going to feel so much better. Like, no. And X-Men is so queer too, right? But anyway, I shipped a straight couple of Gambit and Rogue, and maybe that's wrong. But anyway, I'm sorry, continue. I just got excited. Okay.
No, nothing wrong with that. Yeah, no, I loved X-Men. I think I started writing in those forums when I was 13, and I did that up until I was 18, like for pretty much every single day. And I think my first queer character that I wrote there was Shai Karman, who's Karma, who is a lesbian. She's fabulous, and I probably started writing her when I was like 15 or 16, I think. And since then, all my characters got gradually queerer and queerer, as tends to happen.
Excellent. Anyone else have a...
Yeah, so I've always written from forever, but I didn't write any queer characters until Girls. I completely forgot to say what they're about, but it's two girls falling in love and like killing the patriarchy. So yeah,
there's swords.
Yeah, demons, lots of demons. Asian culture. Yeah, so but I didn't write queer characters until Girls, and I think it was because I didn't know I was queer until I wrote Girls. I don't know if any of you guys, well, we don't need to go into this, it's a bit personal, but for me, I don't mind sharing, but like, I didn't quite realize that I was into girls when I was young, because I think it wasn't given to me, it wasn't presented to me as an option. So even though like I found girls attractive and I would think about girls while I was, you know, doing certain things, I didn't quite...
Hormones of teenage.
Yeah, those teenage hormones. Enjoy them if you're
not right now in quarantine. No. Enjoy this. Anyway,
look, there are different ways to enjoy your hormones. Let's
yes, enjoy them however you want to. Sorry.
or with consenting someone who you know has quarantine. Anyway, this is getting weird.
Anyway, yeah, sorry. So basically, I didn't realize. So until I was writing this story, and I think it took me until I was 26, and when I first thought about the story to really start understanding my own sexuality. So that kind of came hand in hand with the writing.
I think as well, just to pick up on what Natasha was saying there, it's sort of similar for me, because here in the UK, when I was at school, we had a piece of legislation called Section 28, and it basically, essentially, it made it illegal to talk about being LGBT in educational settings, so in schools. So it meant you couldn't have books with queer kids in the school library, you couldn't discuss it in sex education classes or anything like that. And so in a similar sort of way, whilst I started writing when I was about, I think I was 12 when I wrote my first little book on my grand's typewriter. It was it was a thriller called Toxic Danger, all about this guy who wanted to steal a nuclear bomb. It was all really exciting, you know. But I didn't write any gay characters until, you know, years later when I was at uni, when I first sort of for the first time met people who were actually gay, and nobody was in school, you see, not officially,
not openly,
not openly.
They were, but not
exactly the same.
Yeah, that's right. So I think the impact of Section 28, particularly from a UK perspective, you know, it was a huge thing. It was a huge thing, and kind of set us back, I feel, quite a lot of years in this country in terms of output now. So
I didn't even know that was a thing. Do you know when it was taken? I assume it's been
It has. It was abolished. It ran between I think it first came in 1988, and it ran through to about 2003.
Oh, interesting.
So roughly those sorts of years. I might be wrong on the finish date there by 1 or 2 years, but it's around about that time.
Because I never had LGBTQ talks in my sex ed classes at school. No. And I think I was but I only had one, and it was when I was 14, I think, or 13. So it matches up with the timing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So interesting. Do you know if you have that in your countries?
I don't think we have it in Ireland. But I mean, Irish history with queerness is very complicated. Obviously, we're very Catholic, so I honestly don't know. I don't think we had anything like that in our laws, but I wouldn't be surprised if we also did, actually.
Yeah.
Well, we legalized marriage. We had marriage equality in 2001. So.
Oh, that's amazing.
We started out quite early in that sense. I think we're starting to lag behind a bit on other aspects of equality now. But I vividly remember seeing the first gay marriage in the Netherlands, because I was 15 at the time. But even so, I definitely didn't necessarily consider being gay, being queer, and I think a lot of that helped. I started writing when I was about 10, 11, and I do think I started writing queer characters when I was in my late teens, probably because I lived life on the internet, and that's what the internet does. Mm-hmm. But it was still pretty theoretical, and it took me until after high school to come out and figure out sort of where I stood. And then it took me a whole lot longer to figure out that my journey with my own sexuality wasn't just informed by my sexuality, but also my gender identity. And that's one of the things where the Netherlands is lagging behind now. We literally don't have words for things like non-binary gender identity. We just borrow them from English. Up until a few years ago, we didn't have words for gender. And now we have gender. So
we're not that creative. Forgive us.
And in hindsight, I think looking back on the stories I wrote as a younger teen, I think a lot of it makes sense, realizing that I'm non-binary, that I don't necessarily feel female all the time, or even femme, or not entirely sure how my gender identity fluctuates. I specifically identify as agender, by the way, for anyone who's interested in that. So for me, all kinds of
interested, because I feel those are identities that don't often get talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why it took me a while to get there, because it's like, oh, wait, this is a thing you can be. And that's the point where it all sort of started to click for me, and where it started to make sense that for me, gender identity has always been performative because I don't internalize it. And knowing that and going back to the stories I wrote quite early on, there's a lot of trying out different disguises and having characters who can be lots of things that in hindsight make a lot of sense, but definitely weren't purposefully queer or genderqueer at that point. And by now I'm just reaching the point where I'm like, but why wouldn't I make all the characters in my book queer? Because I literally know like 5 straight people and that's it. I was like, I don't know about you, but queer people flock together, trans people flock together. Like occasionally we have a few token straight friends, but you don't have to include them in all your books.
But they can't help it. They're, you know.
Look, they're terrible life choices.
Just to tick boxes like that, you know.
But I you know, think that's interesting about writing when you're a teen and what you kind of come across. And Adiba, did you write creatively as a teenager, or
Like everyone else, like I've been writing for most of my life. I wrote a lot when I was a teen, but unlike everybody else, or most people here, I actually wrote my first book with a queer character when I was 13.
Oh, amazing. Cool.
Well, I then backtracked. So I wrote that book with a queer character. It's actually like a queer Muslim character as well. And then I couldn't end it because the only way I realized I could end it was with like a sad ending. And I was like, I don't want to give them a sad ending. Like I really like these characters and I want them to be happy, but I didn't know how to write that happy ending. Especially because at that time, I don't know if any of you guys watched EastEnders. But there was a queer couple in EastEnders at that time, and there was like a gay couple, and one of them was Muslim. And I didn't watch EastEnders, but one of my friends was like obsessed with it. So that was like my only representation of queerness, and I didn't even watch it.
Was her name Rania, or is that a different character?
No, it was like like 2 men. I can't remember their names, but I just remember my friend was obsessed. Do you remember, Natasha?
Mine was Tipping the Velvet. That's the BBC version. I recorded that every time my parents left. That was on so I don't know about the EastEnders, but yeah. And was your friend obsessed because she was also queer?
Yes, she is. Like at the time, I don't think she realized she was, but now she is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really interesting because like going off of that, just seeing that, I was like, oh, I want to write this queer Muslim character, and I did, but I couldn't end the story. And then after that, everything I wrote didn't have any queer people in it, and I think it was just because I realized I didn't know how to write an ending for like a queer story. And then my next queer story was the one I wrote just before the Henna Wars. And at that time I had realized, you know, my identity. I felt a lot more comfortable with it, felt a lot more confident. I had read a lot more like queer stories. I knew like different queer authors. And I had a lot more representation. So yeah.
Which is also great for all the stuff we're working on because you know, there's still room for a lot more books and a lot more authors, but it's nice to know you're not like the only one in the village. So like your voice is your voice and it's not indicative of all the identities you encompass, you know? So it's like, well, I already read this book, so I don't have to read. It's like, nope, I'm just one person who, you know, so I think that's great. And hopefully what we're seeing more of. I had a craft question for all of you because I'm feeling a bit stifled creatively in Corona. I'm not going to lie. My focus is like 15 minutes at a time for the most part. But I wanted to ask all of you, when you are starting a project, do you start with like the voice of a character and what that character's saying to you and who they are and what kind of adventure you would see them on? Or do you start with like a plot or a concept like I want to do this in space with, you know, whatever, and then fit your characters into that. Does that make sense?
I think, I mean, for me, it changes with each project, to be honest. With Noah Can't Even, it was definitely very much the voice of this geeky teenage boy that came to me first, and the plot followed on. But with Heartbreak Boys, for example, it was very much the plot that was the first thing that popped into my head, and the idea of faking a summer on Instagram, and then the characters kind of came afterwards. So I mean, I just try and keep it fairly flexible in terms of how I work with it, and if the character's voice is speaking to me quite strongly, then I'll go with that. But if it's a plot, then I'll work through that first maybe, and then hope the voice will hopefully come later, depending.
For me, they kind of tend to intertwine and grow as the other does. Like usually I start with like just a bit of a plot and a bit of a character with like 2 traits or something, and they just get really interwoven, so it's kind of hard to separate the 2 eventually. And it's also very different for each book. But I definitely like learn more about my characters as I go.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm similar to Corinne in that they're kind of intertwined. I usually have the idea of the plot first, but I can't actually start writing until I have the voice of the character. So like with the Henna Wars specifically, I had the idea for a long time, for almost a year. And then one day just Nishad's voice kind of came to me. And then I could sit down and I could write it.
I'm very much like Adiba, like I'll have the concept, but for me, it's not so much the voice, it's like the first line. It's always my gateway into the story, and they almost always never change. And I think that's just because to me, it really like anchors me into the project, and it's my entryway. So it's also my reader's entryway.
Yeah, I mean, mostly same to what everyone else has said so far. It does depend a bit on the book itself, but usually I start out with the concepts, no matter how fake it can be. Like occasionally it's nothing more, like, especially with Even If We Break, I wanted to write a thriller and I wanted to incorporate RPG culture because that's a huge part of my life, and it's something I've seen in fiction, but not regularly. So it seemed fun to kind of explore that and have these nerds together, and then also throw in some like deadly situations, because that's what I do. I'm sure I'll write a happy book at some point, but
you don't have to. There's you know, you can write whatever.
It seems like a fun challenge. How do happy?
A couple hard jokes here and there, and
exactly.
Some smiling. You know, it's nice. Okay.
Happy endings, I guess.
I'm going to ask you all individual questions now.
Exciting.
If they make sense or not, let me know. So I'm going to start with Simon.
Okay.
So you do write YA, and we're talking about YA a lot, but you also write for different age groups. Like you have a picture book coming out that I looked up called Llama Glama Rama. Is that correct?
Look at this. Here it is.
That is amazing.
Amazing.
Look at that glittery boy, eh?
Which is about a llama that goes to a pride parade. Is that
basically yes? Okay. It's basically a llama that goes.
Wow,
that is fantastic.
Who is the illustrator?
The illustrator is Gary Parsons, who's done just a fantastic job. That's a brilliant thing about picture books, is you have this other person who contributes another, you know, the other half of what you can't write, and he's fantastic. He's captured so much personality in the characters. It's just wonderful. But it's about a llama that likes dancing, basically. That's his thing. But he keeps it, he's quite ashamed of his secret because, as you know, llamas don't dance. Of course they don't. And so he does it at night when the other llamas have gone to bed. But he's kind of nearly caught like doing a ballet dance, and he can't deal with it, so he sort of runs away. And that's when he sees this poster for a big carnival called the Llama Glamorama, which he goes along to. And the Llama Glamorama is, to all intents and purposes, a gay pride event. It's full of lots of animals dancing and partying, listening to Lana Del Rey perform.
Yes. Wow.
Yes.
I have never been so invested in a fictionary animal life.
There you go.
In a CD, because that's how old I am, kids.
Oh, perfect. Love a retro CD.
I just like that she always sounds like she's about to fall asleep.
Well, she's performing anyway at the Llama Glamorama, so there she is. Well, the llama version of her is.
But why I bring it up is I want to ask you, like, in writing for different age groups, does your mindset change, or do you do things to kind of get in a younger voice, or like, you know, everyone has a different process, like they write with music or they don't, or they like, what is there something that you do to one, think about your audience of a younger person?
Yeah, I do. And actually, because I've got a middle grade coming out as well in September. So I have sort of changed it slightly for each. I mean, the thing is, my default is always going to be kind of comedy and fun stuff.
I can see that about you.
that always seems to happen. So that sort of stays the same. And I guess really my way into most of the projects is also pretty much the same, in that I like to listen to music. I get ideas from other places, from TV shows, from overheard snippets of conversation, from news articles, from Twitter and Instagram and things like that, always quite a lot. So that kind of process always is the same. I guess the only thing that changes really is just technically how I write it for a younger age group. And obviously with a picture book, you know, you're talking about writing maybe 500 words. Right. Whereas obviously in the YA, I'm more like kind of 75, 80,000. And so I guess that's too
much for my blood. That's long.
Coming to the fantasy, no. We're like 120 plus.
Exactly. Maybe it's long for contemporary stuff. It probably is a little bit.
I'm out. It's like poker, like, you know, like I'm out. All that emotional labor, no way.
I think
you're gonna get a 55 minimum.
I do like short books. I have to say, I'd love to write a shorter book. But I think the thing is that no kids or young people like to be patronised in what they're reading, and so I always, you know, I'm always quite careful about that. So whether I'm writing for 15, 16-year-olds or 3 to 5-year-olds, you know, I never kind of, you know, punch down to them. I'm always trying to punch it up in terms of how I'm approaching it and what I'm writing about, and the vocab I'm using and that type of thing.
Well, you're respecting the reader, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Yeah.
Thank you. My next question is for Adiba. I'm so excited to read Hannah Wars, as I've mentioned quite a few, because I think we could all use more rom-coms at this time. And I'm happy to find that, you know, I've been guilty of this, where in one of my books, there's not a very happy ending, right? It's not terrible, but it's not like joyful, right? So I think it's nice to have books in which queer kids experience joy. And there's an interesting element in your book in particular that has to do with Nishat's love interest, Flavia, trying to start a rival henna business, and the cultural appropriation that comes with that. And I think it takes a really great skill to have the audience and main character to like be so in love or so smitten, right? You're like rooting for this love thing to happen. And then the crush in question displays disappointing behavior. Did you start out knowing that was going to be like the conflict between the two, or did it end up being organic? And can you talk about that sort of like when your crush falls from grace, and how is that remedied? Because I experienced that in real life. That once people get to know my personality, they're like, no, thank you. So I don't know how to get back to good graces. So feel free to answer that if you like.
So I did know going in that I wanted to write about cultural appropriation, and I was very careful in terms of how I thought about power disparity in terms of the two characters. So Nishat is South Asian. She's from Bangladesh, and she's also Irish. And Flavia is biracial. So she's Afro-Brazilian, and her father is white Irish. So I think that the power disparities between them are really interesting, because I thought about if Flavia was white and if I was Nishat and Flavia did what she did, that she culturally appropriated from me, would I be able to forgive her? And the answer was no. So, you know, she could not be white. She could not be a white person. And then I thought about what would be an appropriate reason for her to culturally appropriate, that Nishat could forgive her, that they could have a conversation about it and they could, you know, figure it out. They could go on from there. And I mean, I don't want to give spoilers for the book.
No, sorry.
But, you know, it's to do with like Flavia's family, her upbringing, the way that she was raised, and like her own feelings, like about her culture, about her identity, her sexuality, and all of those things. So I wanted them to have a good reason for doing what they did, even if they're doing something wrong, because I think like that's when we can forgive someone, when, you know, there's a reason for it. And it's not just, oh, whatever, I didn't think about this. It's that, you know, it was something to do with their identity, they're grappling with something. And then also I had to think about, you know, the fact that Flavia has to make amends to Nishat. But also Nishat has to understand where Flavia is coming from. She's not without fault either. So that's really like, that's where I was coming from. But it's actually interesting to me because a lot of people have come to me and they say, I hated Flavia at the beginning. Like, I just hated her so much. Like they didn't even get to the point where, you know, Nishat is like obsessed with her and she's like, this girl is holding my hand and like, I love her. They were just like from the beginning, they were like, I hate this girl, you know, why is she here? But I think most readers did get to love Flavia towards the end, which makes me really happy because I think she's like a wonderful character and I had so much fun writing her. And I was afraid when I was writing, would she be able to be redeemed in the eyes of the reader? So I'm glad that there are many readers who did find her to have a redemption. I'm glad too. And I can't wait.
I love that. I think that's really important. Sorry, just jumping in, but that it's so important that teens have representation of flawed relationships as well, because I think like a lot of love interests, especially when I was growing up, I remember reading like they're so perfect, and it's so rare to meet people like that. I mean, it's almost impossible to meet someone who's completely flawed, you know, and people can have great prejudices and biases and issues, but the important thing is if they're willing to understand why they're wrong and then make amends and change. And I think that's more interesting, and it's a much better blueprint for our own sort of journeys through romance than just like this perfect person and, you know, all the time perfect. Okay, well, good for you. Haven't experienced that.
I think especially when you're young, when you're a teenager, like you can't know everything. You know, teenagers probably don't have all of that vocabulary to talk about cultural appropriation or their identity or their culture or different identities and cultures. So that's what I wanted to write. And I agree. Like, I think when I was younger, I read so many romances where the love interest was just like perfect. Everything about them was perfect. They were beautiful. They smelled nice. They were nice all the time. And like, to me, they weren't perfect, but to the characters, they were perfect. And that made me really angry. I was like, I don't think this person is perfect. So, you know, why are you so obsessed with them in this way? Why are you forgiving them for stuff that I would never forgive them for?
Or they were abusive. And then after a while, they're like, oh, no, it was just intense love. It was just...
Oh. That's not...
Oh, boy. All right. Well, next question. This is shared between Corinne and Natasha. You both write queer characters in your own imagined worlds. So whether it's sci-fi or fantasy, in the art of saving the world, it's a future and it's exploring different dimensions. Yes, is that?
It's not a future setting. It's modern day.
Oh, never mind. Well, crap. But they're different dimensions.
Yes.
Okay.
On the Edge of God is its future.
Yes. And Natasha, in the world of Ikara and the Girls of Paper and Fire universe, they're demons, and it's a whole other, you've built the entire world from scratch. So I want to ask you both, like, when you are creating these sort of alternate worlds or a speculative kind of fiction that is like ours but not quite like ours, do you also feel like you're free to have queerness be whatever you'd like it to be, or do you also bring in sort of present day LGBTQ plus issues and talk about them within that world? So you have the freedom to be like, yes, of course, everyone's queer, and this is not that big a deal, but also highlighting like issues that young people today might be going through. Does that make sense?
Corinne? First, or?
Oh, yeah, I can go. So yeah, I think I had a lot of, I think with the story of girls, it's a story of a girl who gets taken to be a demon king's concubine, and the book has a trigger warning, and I'll say a little trigger warning now, but it is about sexual abuse, and it's a lot about the trauma and sort of how do we recover from that, how do we experience it, experience sexual trauma in different ways. And so there was no way for me to kind of talk about that, at least in a way that made sense to me, without it being a patriarchy, because it's something that is something I've experienced and is so impressed upon me. And I think Girls was my kind of way of writing to like, to be able to have more agency against that, and to be able to fight back in ways that maybe I'm not, I don't physically go around wielding a sword and just like mowing down rapists with my machete, although that would be fun. But anyway, and so I think it was kind of like a fantasy, like a fantasy version of issues that I've faced and other people face in the real world. But I think that now, like moving forwards, I definitely I have a project that is set in a matriarchy, and I've all my characters are just always queer because that's kind of my experience. And like you were saying earlier, and Marieke, like with friends and everything as well. But yeah, moving forwards, I want to sort of free myself and liberate myself a bit more. And I think Girls was my way of exploring how that had all impacted me and how I felt in my angry kind of little rage book. But now that I feel more empowered personally, I feel like I'm more free to kind of make my own rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For me, I tend to struggle with that a little bit personally, because I very much agree that I really like that we're seeing more and more like fantasy worlds and far future worlds where queerness is just present and accepted or celebrated and not in any way an issue, which is fantastic. And I love that we're getting more of that. And it's very, very necessary for people to see. But it's also not something I've personally been able to relate to as much as settings where there is unfortunately more like real world homophobia and such, because yeah, unfortunately that is something that I can relate to and recognize. So that does tend to be what I fluctuate toward if there's any root whatsoever in our own world. So for On the Edge of Gone, it's set in the near future. So it's still very similar to our world. So there's definitely still a lot of prejudice in that world. That's also actually a fairly big part of the plot eventually. But in Other About, my first novel, that was a completely secondary fantasy world, and there it was a non-issue whatsoever. But yeah, in The Art of Saving the World, there are other dimensions, but they're generally very similar to ours, so they're also going to have similar, prejudice and discrimination. It was particularly interesting tackling queerness in The Art of Saving the World, because teenagers these days, but also when I was growing up, we have the internet, we can research and read things, and I was able to figure out a lot just all by myself in that way. But my main character, for plot reasons, she has zero privacy, basically. Like, people are looking in on everything she does, because as the chosen one, there's the government like monitoring her. So she knows that every single search term she puts into her computer or phone is monitored and being seen by people. And that leads to her basically not using the internet much at all, because it's really not as much fun if you have someone looking over your shoulder. And it also really makes it harder for her to figure out her own queerness and where she might stand, because she doesn't have a lot of the vocabulary. If you grow up in a small town where it's not really talked about much, and you also don't have access to the internet, she knows that she's very cut off from that sort of thing. And that definitely influences how she feels about it and how she talks and thinks about it. And that was definitely something that I enjoyed building that, but it was also tricky to figure out, because the internet is such an ingrained part of our own world these days. And everybody else in her life and classmates would still have the internet. So she is very much an outsider in that sort of way. And that would definitely extend to her experience of queerness.
You all have really good answers. I mean, woof, what a panel. All right, last individual question, and then I will ask you all the sort of, Marieke, it's so exciting that you have a graphic novel with DC. I'm a big comic book nerd. I have my Batman Forever soundtrack here. I don't know if you can see it. I also have my Batman Forever graphic novel here, because I had a big thing for Nicole Kidman, but also I'm a big DC Batman person. So I was really excited to see that you were writing Barbara Gordon. And I was wondering, like, when you are working on an IP, certainly you're playing in someone else's sandbox. So like the character is not your creation, and you're being asked to come in and do your own thing. I want to know how receptive DC was to the Barbara Gordon that you've written, which is like, she has continuity and it's familiar to Batman fans, but also has, I feel like, so much more agency as a young person. Like, we've seen like her as Batgirl, and then like Alan Moore's Killing Joke, that she goes through that horrible trauma. Yeah. But that's how she ends up disabled. And so I just wanted to know what your experience was like when you were like, this is what I want to do, and these are the characters she's going to be around, and this is sort of the way I'm writing her, and how receptive were they or weren't they, or that sort of thing.
They were super open to basically whatever I wanted to do, to the point where I think the first couple of times I sent in pitches and sent in outlines, it was quite a bit more beholden to continuity than the book ended up being. And it's funny you mentioned the Killing Joke. I think that's probably the perfect example. Is I didn't want to touch on that too much.
I know.
I have many strong feelings about that particular story arc. None of them good. But that was also one of the first conversations I had with my editors, where it was along the point of, where do we start the story and how does she become disabled? And I really wanted her to have more agency in that whole journey. And obviously, like, none of what happens is actually her choice, but she ends up in a wheelchair because she's shot, and that nods to the original Killing Joke, but she ends up in a situation where she's shot because she hears something going on and runs towards it. She hears something going on. She worries about her father. She wants to go and see what's happening. And basically, through no fault of her own, but wanting to help people, she ends up in this situation. And I felt that was important to have, to at least give her that sense of agency, and that sense of she's making the choices, and what happens to her doesn't happen purely to punish male characters, purely as a way to like fridge women and use it to further the plot lines of male characters. Let's just not. And having that freedom to tackle such an important story in the DC universe, and be able to move around it and find my own way to basically tell Barbara's origin story was really freeing and helped me a lot in figuring out who the character was from that point on. And it was honestly just an amazing experience. Beyond having Barbara and her father and the name Arkham, I don't think there's anything that I've actually borrowed from continuity. All the other characters are characters that we made up, that I developed along with Manuel, my illustrator. And I just got to tell this story about a young girl who becomes disabled, becomes a wheelchair user, and has to find a way to live with that. And it was just, it's not an easy story. And Barbara's journey is a hard one. And it's one that involves a lot of pain and a lot of anger and a lot of grief and a lot of losing control of her life and figuring out where she is and how she can go back to being who she was. And I think on one hand, it's important to show that, to show, like, I'm talking about perfection just now. Like, it's important to show our main characters as imperfect too, because it's like perfect people really aren't that interesting. And especially when you're writing about marginalized characters, I feel like there's quite a lot of pressure in being as perfect as possible. So I really wanted to have her be disabled and angry, which is not a combination we often see. So it was really nice to be given the space to explore that. It's really nice to explore the characters in the background, like most of the other, obviously Barbara's white because that's who she is in at least a big part of continuity. But most of the other characters aren't, because disability representation is far often too white. So that's something I wanted to be aware of and cognizant of. And the two girls that Barbara spends most of her time with are not so subtly, though apparently quite subtly to me, at least not so subtly queer. There have definitely been people who were like, you wrote this and no one is queer? I was like, well, no, they're literally making out at some point.
Oh, great.
I don't think you can get like yeah, no, they're just like sharing a wheelchair, hanging out, just gals being pals. That's how that goes.
She's just sitting on my lap. I don't know how she got there.
Oh, exactly.
Came on over and on my lap. Yeah.
Pretty much, it was an easier way of getting around. It's just being together.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna read that book and listen to "Kiss from a Rose on the Grave," and then
that sounds like a perfect combination.
Baby. Okay, we have about, I think, like 7 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask all of you a question. Because I think right now, you know, everyone's taking things one day at a time, and it's important to be present and see how we can be helpful and look out for one another. But also, it's important to be hopeful about the future and you know, keep that going for people. So I want to ask all of you, what do you hope readers get from your book or books? And what do you hope for the future of queer YA holds?
Oh my God, give me like 10 minutes to think about. Wow.
And if you have any questions for me.
Sarah with the deep questions.
You know.
I mean, I can start this off by what I hope for the future of queer YA is more, just like endlessly more. More intersections. I love to see more queer people of color in books written by queer authors of color, ideally.
You know, the best way to make sure that happens is if the people support them.
Buy them. Yep, absolutely in favor of that, because my bookshelf need them. So I would love to see that. I'd love to see more disabled queer people, many more non-binary characters in fiction. Because, like I said, it took me a while to get to this point, and I think a lot of things might have been a bit easier if I had had the words to figure out who I am earlier on. So that's definitely something I would love to see.
What do you hope your readers get from your work? It's a two-pronged question.
Oh God, yeah, I forgot about that. Well, I think to some extent, some of the things like disabled trans character. There's a disabled trans character in my book. There's a non-binary character in my book. There's an autistic queer character in my book. Because all these parts of me that I never saw, I want to be able to show to readers. So, like on a surface level, I hope readers see that and hopefully recognize themselves in that. On a slightly deeper level, a lot of Even If We Break is a book about how we break each other and the secrets we keep and the secrets that end up hurting the people around us. The ways in which we often take the easy way out, how we don't talk about things that are uncomfortable. There's I was just annotating an arc the other day, and one of the comments I made is, this is not so secretly a book about white complicity. And I think that is something, especially just addressing white queer people who are watching this, I think that is something that I would love to see us think about more, because from my experience as a white person, the queer community can be pretty racist. And
you don't say.
No, I know, right? let me just phrase this in terms of, that's my observation. I have an inkling that you might have feelings about that too. So yeah, I'd love to see readers think about that and think about how comfort is a privilege, and sometimes it's good to be uncomfortable because it's the only way we can grow towards each other,
especially post corona.
Yes,
like we don't have time for this shit anymore.
Nope.
Yeah, can we
should have been beyond this a long time ago, but since we're not, let's do something now.
Yeah, sorry if we're poor. We'll put their some
okay. The kids, they get it.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to answer that two-pronged question of what do you hope readers get from your work, and what do you hope the future of queer YA holds?
Yeah, so for me, sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it, please.
For me, from my book, first of all, I wrote it for queer brown girls. That's who it's dedicated to. So I guess I hope that queer brown girls can read it and they can see a reflection of themselves in the pages. That would be the first thing I hope they get. And secondly, I hope that young queer readers can see Nishad's journey, and they can learn that you have to learn how to love yourself, and you need to learn how to accept yourself, even if the world is telling you that you shouldn't, even if the people you care about are telling you that you shouldn't. It's really, really difficult, but that is one of the things that is going to get you through it. You just need that self-love, and you need that self-acceptance. In terms of what I hope for in the future of queer YA, I also hope for a lot of intersectionality, a lot of diversity in the future of queer YA. And I guess what I really, really hope for is that we get to a point where we have so many stories of queer YA that we don't have to have this entire conversation about queer joy, because I don't want to have that conversation anymore. Like, I love writing queer joy. No, but I love writing queer joy, and I understand where people are coming from. But all my friends who don't want to write that, I see how frustrated they get, because they feel this responsibility that if they're not giving their queer characters a happy ending, that readers are going to be disappointed. But I just want to get to a point where we have enough of queer joy and we have enough of queer tragedy that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think a lot of that argument comes from too, it's like when people are like, oh, we're sick of coming out stories, it's like, well, maybe only a certain group of people have been able to come out in stories, you know what I mean? Like it always feels like, oh, we're done with that trope once like a non-white person writes about it. But anyway, that's another panel. Never mind. I'm not doing anything in quarantine. I'm so single. Simon, would you like to answer?
I think Corinne has something to say.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, what I hope readers get from my books, both On the Edge of Gone and The Art of Saving the World, one thing they have in common is that it's very much about learning to value yourself and being gentle with yourself, because it is so common for anybody, but especially teen girls and especially marginalized people, to have these really high ambitions and hopes because you have to be perfect and you have to live up to certain expectations, and you're not allowed to fail because that would reflect badly on you and the group you belong to, etc. And that makes life really miserable. So a lot of it is just about being gentle with yourself and valuing yourself, and learning to treat yourself the way you might treat a friend, basically. And what I would like to see more of in queer YA, well, everything everybody else said, because I thought those were really good answers. The one that especially I've been thinking of is, like, I would love to see more of all the, like you said, like all the stuff that we're supposedly done with, like, oh, this has been done, these tropes are done. No, there hasn't. Like, you can name so many vampire books, but, like, okay, so how many queer vampire books can you name, though? Like, what if I want to read a queer vampire book in YA? Oh, I can read this one. If I don't like it, well, tough luck, because that's all you get. I would just love to have so many books and so many options, and also to just give them the chance to fail.
Right.
Because there's so much pressure on every book to succeed, because, like, if you have a queer vampire book and it fails, well, no more queer vampire books then, I guess. Like every marginalized group, you have to work harder and you have to be better. And I really want to give queer creators just the freedom to experiment and try things out and not be the only one in a certain genre or category, because that's way too much pressure, and we need that variety and freedom.
I feel that too, for sure. About, like, being I just wish that it wasn't a thing. I don't know, like, to me it's still not really a thing. I guess I never really had this, like, proper coming out, and it was like a very fluid journey for me, and I would love to be able, there just is so much queer fiction that it doesn't even need to be, like, labeled as queer, right? And then you can see yourselves in the pages, but it doesn't have to be like a thing. And also that publishing houses don't just take, like, this, oh, we've got one, tick, or oh, no, we've got one Asian one now, tick, and so yeah, that's that. And I loved everyone's answers for what they hope that they want readers to feel when they read their books. I think that's so lovely, and that's all we can really ask for, is to feel seen when we read.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we did it.
Hooray!
We're going to sign off, but I want to thank all of the authors for being here and for writing what you write. And I hope you liked me. I liked you. And I hope everyone checks out their work, because it's entertaining and fun and great, and there's something for everyone. And if you don't feel that way, then I don't know what to tell you. I guess you don't have to.
They would have gone long before the end of this.
I want to thank all of you so much, and I want to thank everyone watching, and I hope everyone stays well, and you and your loved ones and are well, and let's keep being hopeful and keep being here and queer and international.
Yeah.
Yay.
An international delight. And I don't need a coffee creamer. This was really lovely. And we're signing off. Thanks, Kidlit Pride. Sorry about the swearing.
Bye.
Bye.